creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary. The extraordinary is the long history of ghostly sightings in this brutal colonial jail.
It sounded like sobbing, and it was really hard sobbing and someone really crying for some reason. I don't know why. Well, I was the only person in the building, and I couldn't understand why I could hear this noise, and it sounded as though it was either a child or a woman.
It is said the lonely spirits of the executed still walk the lonely corridors. It is the astronauts who have reported seeing strange things in space. Things even they cannot explain.
When we went to the moon, conventional wisdom was Earth was the biological center of the universe. This was the only place in the universe that had intelligent life like ourselves. There is enough evidence to suggest that there is more known in this area than is available to the public. And many people believe that our governments are engaged in a large cover-up in this regard. I think it's quite possible.
The extraordinary is the people who believe in cryonics, snap freezing of the body to be reinstated to life sometime in the future.
The prospect of living for a long time and seeing what the future is going to bring is very exciting. People who are first being exposed ask, well, why do you want to live for such a long time? And the only way to answer that question really is to turn it around and say, well, why do you want to die?
It is the parachutist who jumped out of a plane and slammed into the fuselage so hard his body left an imprint.
I started thinking of some really weird things now, you know, like I couldn't do anything. I was really mad because I had this feeling like here I am, perfectly okay. You know, I was talking to myself and I tried everything I could, and I could look down, I could see the ground, and I kept thinking, I'm okay now, but when I hit that, I'm going to die.
Then he plummeted thousands of meters to Earth with no parachute and lived. Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
More on the ultimate survival a little later. Good evening. I'm Warwick Moss. Bushranger Ned Kelly was just one of many criminals put to death in the infamous Melbourne jail. A notorious place of death and suffering, the jail was home to gruesome acts of punishment and retribution. Most of the sad souls who faced the executioner left the prison, but some may have stayed on to walk its corridors forever. Old Melbourne Jail has a harsh and brutal history. From the day it opened in 1845 to the day it closed in 1929, more than 50,000 prisoners languished behind its cold and forbidding walls. Today, it's a museum packed with macabre exhibits, reminders of the 100 men and 4 women who were sent to the scaffold here and died by the hangman's noose. A cruel but swift dispatch, according to the museum manager, Amanda Baker.
The hangman would have visited the prisoner in the cell, and that's to measure their strength of their neck and to weigh them to make sure that the length of the rope was the right length so that they were hanged correctly. If the rope was too long, then the head would come away from the body when the hanging was done. And if the rope was too short, then the person would be strangled rather than hanged. And hanging was breaking the neck. It was like that.
Among those who met their end in Melbourne Jail was Australia's most famous, or infamous, bushranger, Ned Kelly. He walked these dark, dank corridors for the last time on November the 11th, 1880. That is the gruesome. But now, more than a century later, there are the ghostly attractions, which beckon from the cells of old Melbourne jail. Unexplained happenings by day and by night. Amanda Baker wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. At least, not until she took over as manager of the museum 7 years ago. Now, she's not so sure.
When I first started here at the jail, the manager at the time, he told me about a lady who used to come in, and every time she came in, she'd stand at one end of the cell block and look towards the other end, and she'd see these three figures of what she thought were women, and it just happened every single time. I never met this woman. All I did was hear this story from my previous manager.
And staff too have had weird experiences. Experiences that stretch the imagination and defy logic.
We have a tour guide here called Bob. He's been with us for about 5 years, and he was starting his tour up on the stairs back there, and somebody asked him straight off the top, said, "Oh, are there any ghosts here?" And he said, "Oh no," he said, "nothing that we've experienced." And at that time, there's a cell just sort of directly to the side of him while he was doing his tour, and the light flashed off, on, off, on, and that was just the one light. Now we found that there was nothing wrong with the globe, and for that to happen, for it to be a circuit failure or anything like that, had to happen to all these cells on this side, as they're all on the same electricity circuit.
But it was a personal encounter that caused Amanda Baker to really question what was going on inside this place, where so many suffered and so many died.
I left the cell that night. I got my coat and everything was in order, and I closed the door and I went out and locked the door behind me and went home. Then I came in the next morning, and I was the first one in, and I went in to hang up my coat, and I look on the ground, and there's the sugar canister smashed in the middle of the floor. There's also, we had a basket hanging up on the wall, and that was also on the floor. There was no reason for that. There was no wind or nothing could ever get into that cell from when I closed it the night before. There's no explanation as we would know it. The sugar canister, I found it was on the floor, and it was smashed, and the glass wasn't everywhere. It was all sort of neat in a nice little pile, but there's no explanation except for something, a being in here.
Sometimes, even in the light and safety of the museum shop, Severina Stella also ponders the ghosts of Melbourne jail. Especially the night she was left alone to lock up. First, for no apparent reason, a light bulb shattered. Then, 10 minutes later, she began hearing strange noises.
I realised it sounded like sobbing, and it was really hard sobbing, someone really crying for some reason. I don't know why. I was the only person in the building, and I couldn't understand why I could hear this noise, and it sounded as though it was either a child or a woman. And I thought, oh no, don't tell me I'm experiencing something unnatural and I'm hearing some ghost or something in here. I don't go around saying it was a ghost, but at the same time I don't go around saying it's not. I tell a lot of people strange things do happen in here, but I work here 5 days a week and I can't start believing in ghosts, otherwise I'd probably go crazy. But I'm not going to say that they don't exist, because there is something in here.
Monique Weir also believes there could be something or someone lurking in the jail. And maybe she has the evidence to prove it. Monique is a keen photographer and saw the old prison as a perfect subject. On the day in question, she was absolutely certain she was alone in this section of the cell block. She fired off a series of photographs, and later sent the roll of film to be developed.
And when I got it back, I sort of didn't notice it first, and then had another closer look and thought, oh, there's something really weird here. But I just sort of shook it off. I'm a bit sort of, don't really believe in ghosts or anything like that. And it wasn't until a few other people started to have a look at it that they realised that there was probably something there.
That something again. But what? Well, in one print, there seems to be a misty, floating object that wasn't visible through the camera's viewfinder. And in another, a more defined figure.
On the left-hand side was this man, well, it looked like a man, back of a man, quite tall, with a big overcoat on, it looked like. And he looked like he had really broad shoulders. And that's sort of really all I could see. He was quite sort of transparent, and you could only see the top and not the bottom.
At first, Monique was sceptical and checked the negatives in her own darkroom. The figures were on them too. So she took the photographs back to the processing lab for a second opinion.
Oh, they were quite freaked out about it. They could see that it was on the negative and it wasn't anything that was done in the printing process. Yeah, they were really quite freaked out.
When the old jail finally closed 65 years ago, no doubt there was a collective sigh of relief amongst the caring souls of Melbourne. A hope that the days of torture and brutality were over, dead and buried, like so many of its former inmates. But now, there are those who wonder whether the echoes of those days don't still resound through the cells in this notorious building.
It is definitely a strange place. It's a beautiful building, but it is a very strange place. There's been a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of death in here. There's got to be something in here. There definitely is. I'm not saying Ned Kelly's floating around or anything like that, but with all the pain and suffering in here, there's got to be something.
Since the NASA space program began, the scientific miracles and space age heroes have spawned books and movies like The Right Stuff. The astronauts who followed Neil Armstrong's One Giant Step for Mankind are a pretty pragmatic bunch. Their survival depends on being clear-headed and precise. So we take notice when we learn that no less than 26 astronauts have reported not only seeing UFOs while in space, but have become convinced there is far more to man's existence than meets the eye. They say something happens to you when you're out there. Something changes about the way you look at the Earth, the way you see mankind and the heavens. Something different about the meaning of life. Edgar Mitchell, the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 14 mission, reads from the book he wrote trying to describe it.
Suddenly from behind the rim of the moon, in long, slow-motion movements of immense majesty, there emerges a sparkling blue and white jewel, a light, delicate sky-blue sphere laced with slowly swirling veils of white, rising gradually like a small pearl in a thick sea of black mystery. It takes more than a moment to fully realize this is Earth, home.
Floating in space, in fact, changed Edgar Mitchell's life in many ways. He is among the many astronauts who came back with the sense that something else is out there, something man cannot understand, but something as real and tangible as the Earth itself.
when we went to the moon, conventional wisdom was Earth was the biological center of the universe. This was the only place in the universe that had intelligent life like ourselves. No one believes that anymore. It is quite likely that the universe is filled with intelligent life. Now, the question, have we found each other? That's quite a different matter. There is enough evidence to suggest that there is more known in this area than is available to the public. And there's been a lot of effort studying the so-called UFO and visitation events, but we don't have a smoking gun in that regard. But we do have a lot of rumor, a lot of circumstantial evidence, and many people believe that our governments are engaged in a large cover-up in this regard. I think it's quite possible.
His feelings about man's inability to understand the dimensions of space motivated Mitchell to establish the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Florida.
Noetic derives from the Greek word nous, N-O-U-S, meaning mind, and in English, noetic pertains to the way we apprehend and perceive information, either through our sensory mechanisms or through our intuitive faculties, or directly from our internal sentience or knowing. So it pertains, noetic pertains to all of those methods of apprehending information. It was indeed the fact that of this profound experience in flight that made me recognize our models of our reality, of how the universe came about and our place in it, were really flawed in the 20th century, and we needed new ones. And so I set out to think about that and to resolve these issues. We have to have a new model of what we are in the 20th century if we hope to create an enduring, sustainable civilization for the next century or so. And that was the driving force to found the Institute of Noetic Sciences.
Mitchell also wrote that looking at Earth from up there was like getting a glimpse of divinity.
We have come to believe, thanks to 400 years of our science, modern science, that everything is separate and discrete and independent, and that the universe we observe is just independent stars and bits of clouds of helium and hydrogen in the cosmos, and galaxies and galactic clusters. And my perception, as I looked at it from deep space, was to say that description misses the mark, that we really have an intelligent, self-organizing, interconnected universe, and that my body and that spacecraft we were in, and that of bodies of my companions, the molecules were all made in the furnace of some ancient star. Virtually all of the people that went into space, particularly deep space, had a profound experience as they looked at Earth. And the political boundaries melted. The Earth, instead of being a huge planet that we're used to, suddenly looks tiny and fragile and beautiful and harmonious. And we know from experience that it's filled with people struggling against each other for another piece of land or a little more material gain or whatever. That the peacefulness of the planet is really belied by the human activity that's going on. And we need to look at that very carefully, because the evidence suggests that the human species is about to overrun its feeding ground. And it's just not at all clear that 30 or 40 years from now, when we're likely to have 10 to 12 billion population, doubling from our current almost 6, that Earth can sustain that sort of human activity. It really, my belief in that became more solid after the lunar flight. Let's say getting out of the trees and looking at the forest sort of idea. It gives you a different perspective, a different insight. And that's really what happened on the lunar flight, is that I recognized that our description of ourselves and our place in the universe given to us by science was incomplete and flawed. And that our description given to us by our cultural traditions, notably our religions, was archaic and flawed. And that what we needed to do in the modern period was invent a new story about ourselves based upon the evidence and the knowledge and the science and the experience that we have as human beings, as we had now become a spacefaring civilization, which we'd never been before, and that we needed a new story. And that's really what I've been about for 20 years, is what is that new story? What is our place in the universe? How did we get here? Where are we going? And why?
Man you're about to meet jumped out of a plane at 3,500 meters. He slammed into the wing of the plane so hard his body outline was imprinted in the metal. His parachute tangled and failed, and he plummeted to earth like a stone. Stephen Renshaw is one of those men who probably should be a statistic. He certainly shouldn't be around to tell his story. Stephen and his wife Lisa know he's one of the luckiest skydivers alive. After all, not many people plunge 3,000 meters, that's 9,000 feet, out of the sky and survive. Stephen Renshaw's miraculous escape happened in August 1985. He and his team were over the little town of Batchelor in the far north of Australia, preparing for a tandem jump, one they call a donut dive. Stephen was 24 years old, and this was to be his 200th jump. It came perilously close to being his last.
I was the second person to climb out, and I'd actually climbed out in position, was laying along this wing strut. I saw the third person get out, which happened to be Chief Instructor mine, Vic Balfour, and then I was waiting for his wife, Belinda, who was also on the team, to pick up my leg grip before we could give the count and go. And for some reason or other, there was a lag in between her picking up my leg grip and giving the count, and I sort of looked around towards her to think, you know, why haven't you picked my leg grip up? And her eyes were just like dinner plates looking at me. And that's the last thing I can remember. Everything just went black after that for a second or two. I just, you know, there was a huge bang, and it was just blackness for a while.
Stephen's teammates were safely away, but he was in deep trouble. As these stills taken after the event clearly show, he'd been hurled into the side of the aircraft and stunned by the impact. The dent is where he hit the plane.
For a lot of the first instant, I was just sort of hanging there, you know. So obviously been knocked out. But it's weird how consciously I was out, unconscious, so to speak. But subconsciously, I must still tick over in there, because I remember thinking, thoughts, you're in trouble, you're in trouble. You know, I remember that thought coming into me, you know, there's something wrong, you're in trouble, you know. And that's when it was a real physical effort to try and open my eyes to see what was going on.
The other divers were still up there in the sky, but there was nothing they could do to help, even when disaster struck again. Stephen's reserve chute was damaged, useless. That left only his main canopy between him and the ground.
I thought, beauty, you know, my canopy's going to open. And then as the canopy started to come out of its bag and just started to inflate, it disconnected from me. And I thought, what's going on? Oh, God. And I looked down, and on the front of me, you got a couple of handles that you pull, but there was nothing. Because when I got ripped through the wing, everything on the front of me had been torn off. I didn't have a chest strap, I didn't have an altimeter. The handles, the clothes I was wearing at the time had actually cuts in them and rips in them as well. And this thing just took off. I thought, that's it. I can't do anything. I started thinking some really weird things now. You know, like I couldn't do anything. I was really mad because I had this feeling like, here I am, perfectly okay. You know, I was talking to myself and I tried everything I could, and I could look down, I could see the ground, and I kept thinking, I'm okay now, but when I hit that, I'm going to die. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, you know, like, it's just not right, you know, it's just not fair. Now, this time I was over top of a runway, and there was like a distance between the tree lines, and I started thinking, the trees. Maybe if I can hit the trees. Now, this might sound a bit silly, but I thought back to the old Rambo film when he jumps off the cliff, you know, and he goes pounding through this pine tree and comes out at the bottom unscathed, you know. The tree breaking his fall. I could see that I was getting close to the tree, so I put my feet and knees together. I got myself really small, tucked myself up in a ball, and then I just shut my eyes. I thought, well, this is going to happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And you know, I suppose I just want my eyes open to see what was going to happen, basically. And then I just remember hitting the trees, and it was just a really weird sensation. It was all happening so fast. It was like, you sort of felt like maybe, you know, someone lying on the ground and having 10 people kick the hell out of them, you know. And that's what it felt. It's just like crash, 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 and then this big thud, and I knew I'd hit the ground.
At that moment, Stephen Renshaw didn't know if he was dead or alive. As his teammates raced to the rescue, they too feared the worst.
Then I remember feeling all this wet mush on my chest. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm bleeding. You know, like something's broken. And I said, Vic, come here, Vic. And I get him down. I said, look, I think I've cut myself or something. You know? I said, you better have a look. So he sort of lifts up my tracksuit and everything, looks down and just starts laughing. You know, it's just the fact that I'd gone into shock and I was just sweating fiercely. I was just sweat pouring out of me. And they managed to cut me out of the harness the best they can and put one of those the stretchers around that they do with the backs and carted me off to hospital.
The next day, Stephen's story was splashed over the front pages of newspapers across Australia. Some of the headlines were a bit lurid, but one fact was indisputable. Stephen Renshaw had plummeted 9,000 feet and survived. His only injuries were a twisted neck and some bruises. 5 days after the accident, Stephen was released from hospital. 2 days after that, he was getting ready to go up again.
Yeah, I went and did it and enjoyed it. Once the parachute was open, I think that was the only thing I was worried about, parachute opening again. Landed and yeah, it was fantastic. I wasn't going to give the sport up because to give the sport up then would have been like, I would have felt like a failure because I would have been giving it up because I was scared. And I wasn't scared of skydiving. It was something I really enjoyed doing. So I knew I wasn't going to give it up at that time, and I'm still doing it today.
Today, Stephen and Lisa also have their own business. Ironically, repairing parachutes and making flying suits. Stephen's now clocked up more than 2,500 jumps. But every now and then, he thinks back to that moment in August 1985. The moment he knew he'd defied all the odds and survived.
I was so happy then. You know, it was just, yeah, it was just so much joy that it was hard to explain. I don't think that I could ever feel that again, or I haven't come across an instant in my life yet where I felt like that.
Unexplained events, strange sightings, coincidence, luck, chance. They are all part of everyday life. While we understand events out of the ordinary do occur, they still take us by surprise.
There are some among us who think differently than the rest. Nothing about them stands out. They walk the same streets, drive the same cars, live in the same suburbs. But they're different. Like this man, his name is Dave Krieger. His day is average. He works 5 days a week. He lives a normal life. The only apparent difference to friends and associates is that Dave's had an unusual job, a full-time science fiction consultant to the Star Trek television series. That's a clue, but it's not the whole story of why Dave Krieger is different. What makes him really different is that he thinks there's a chance that he'll live forever.
The prospect of living for a long time and seeing what the future is going to bring is very exciting. People who are first being exposed asked, well, why do you want to live for such a long time? And the only way to answer that question really is to turn it around and say, well, why do you want to die? If there's a medical procedure or a technology that allows you to keep living and to continue enjoying life, then to not pursue that is equivalent to suicide.
He knows he will have to die first, but Dave thinks he has a chance of coming back. And to that end, he's going to have his head frozen.
The cost is about 40% or a third, I guess, of the cost of whole body.
The process is called cryonics. The idea is that science will discover how to repair body cells and rebuild us so long as we get frozen at death.
We know that every time you lower the temperature of a biological organism about 10 degrees Celsius, you cut its metabolic demand in half. In other words, you slow down time for this organism by about 50%. And if you keep doing this, keep lowering its temperature, eventually everything is just locked up in the biology of that organism. It's completely unchanging, even over hundreds or thousands of years. This is what happens at the temperature of liquid nitrogen. So this is why we put our patients at that temperature, so nothing will happen to them for as long as it takes for the technology to come about to repair them.
It's hard to predict where technology is going to go and how soon things will arrive. I forget who it was that said that the problem with predicting the future is that things arrive too soon and in the wrong order. My own personal estimate is that I don't think we're going to have full molecular nanotechnology capability before around 2025. And I think it's going to be at least 10 years before there's any possibility of reviving cryonic suspendees. So 2035 is probably the soonest.
Dave's Star Trek The Next Generation colleagues actually did an episode on cryonics a while back, but that's definitely not where he got the idea.
Star Trek The Next Generation did an episode that was related to cryonics. They discover 3 people who've been in suspension since the 20th century. And
Technology and colonies in space and things like that.
When it comes down to it, Dave Krieger isn't really banking on eternal life, just buying a ticket in the chance.
Every generation that's gone before us has known with certainty that they're going to be lost to the world. They're going to be erased from existence. And with cryonic suspension, there's the very real possibility of being alive again.
Pleasure of sitting down with stars like the late Telly Savalas, Angie Dickinson, Rod Steiger, Robert Mitchum, Corbin Burnson, and young guys like Ian Ziering of 90210. Most of them have come up with memories of strange events in their lives on the spot, without much preparation. And it always amazes us that not one, since this show began, has failed to recall an experience with the unexplainable. But the story that sticks in my mind over the past 2 years was the one told by Telly Savalas.
I was never superstitious. I'll give you a ride. But then something happened in my life which scared the hell out of me. And for something like that to happen to me is something that I can't understand to this day. God knows how many years ago. Let me think now. 58, 59. It's a lot of years ago. Now, I just left off a date, and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going home to Long Island after dropping her off. And as would happen, I ran out of gas. So I start walking through the woods, a wooded area, not the woods, going up, and as I'm doing that, I hear a voice say, I'll give you a ride. I turn around, and there's this guy in the Cadillac. And I didn't hear the Cadillac.
You hear the voice, and what do you see?
I see a guy in a white suit, and I hear an effeminate voice. He say, I'll give you a lift. I said, that's very nice. I said, I'm going to a gas station. We get to the gas station, talking very nice. And I'm fumbling around in my pockets. And he says, I'll lend you $1. Well, I didn't ask him for money. And the truth is, I was broke. And I said, well, look, I says, you know, I work for the State Department, and, well, anyway, give me your name and address, all right? Allow me to mail it to you, because I'm very embarrassed. Anyway, I go there, I get a can, pay for the gas. And we start driving back to my car to put the gas in the car, and I thought that was very nice of him. Get to my car, put the gasoline in. He pushes me to get it started. Pushes me to get it started. My car starts. I thank him very much. All in all, it's a very lovely experience to meet someone to help you out like that. No incident whatsoever. Go home, go to work in the morning, and then I remembered that he gave me a piece of paper for me to send $1 to. I look at it, and there besides the address is a telephone number. Okay. Pick it up and I call the number. Jimmy's Bar. Oh, I said, well, can I speak to Mr. Cullen, please? Oh, Mr. Cullen, just a minute. Woman gets on the phone.
Who's calling?
Hi, may I speak to Mr. Cullen, please?
He's not here.
When do you expect him?
Who is this?
I says, well, I was with Mr. Cullen last night, and he gave me this telephone number, and he said I could reach him here. She says...
Look, you son of a bitch, I don't know what you're talking about. You're talking about my husband, and he's been dead for 2 years.
Anyway, I wouldn't let it go. I did get in touch with the woman again. I did meet her in New York. She came down from Boston. Because, you know, this is a little too much. The clothes I described were the clothes he was buried in. The piece of paper that he gave me signed James Cullen. She brought a letter that he wrote her when he was in the Army. It had Jimmy on that. Outside of that, the signature is identical. There was only one thing that was different. I said he had a high voice. She said, oh, no, she said. He had a deep voice like yours. Oh. Then it meant he killed himself. This way, right through the voice. Blocks, whatever. Anyway, this story happened to a guy like me, and as I say, it's been haunting me now close to 40 years. I'm playing golf right here in California. And I think it's the 7th hole, or the 6th hole, at El Caballero. I think it's a par 3. And as we're shooting, I'm playing with famous personality here called Dennis James. And the guy, Merrill Heater, who's the nephew of Gabriel Heater, a commentator in this country. And as we approach the tee, from far away I hear this guy on top of a hill saying, "Telly," and I turned around. I started shaking because the voice was somehow familiar. He says, "Did you hear what happened in Dallas?" I said, "What?" Then I asked Dennis, "Did you hear that?" "Yeah." I said, "What did he say?" He said, "I don't know." And now I'm shaking. We played the 7th hole, played the 8th hole, played the 9th hole. We go inside to get something to eat. We're sitting down. Television is on. I order whatever the hell I ordered. Then Walter Cronkite breaks in. The president has just been shot in Dallas, Texas. Oh, God. That's how I was.
Same voice you heard in that car that night?
Yeah.
A man dressed in white.
And an hour and a half before the bulletin broke on CBS. At time, they shot him. That's only half the story. I'm not going to tell you the rest. It doesn't end there. I wish the hell it would. But as I say, to happen to somebody like me is, I don't comprehend. Because if 2 don't make 4, 2 and 2, it startles me.
That's all we've got time for tonight. If you have a story you'd like us to investigate, write to Post Office Box 462, Newport Beach, Sydney, Australia, 2106. Include a telephone number, please. Until next time, good night. See you in the future.